It's a very conspicuous fact about psychosis that I uncovered the other day when looking at rates of psychosis in the native Dutch population, which are 0.03% of the population per year thought to suffer from a psychotic illness, versus 0.74% of the UK population per year thought to suffer from a psychotic illness. Now, these two statistics could not be more starkly different. The rate of psychosis in the UK is 2,366% higher than it is in the Netherlands, and I think it's somewhat unlikely that the native Dutch population differ from us so vastly in terms of genetics that we are, for whatever magical reason it is, far more susceptible to psychosis. What the NHS mental health services are constantly crying out for is more money. Obviously, they constantly harp on about how underfunded they are, how they can't provide proper treatment. All the while, they run roughshod over the civil liberties of their patients and provide a modernised, updated imitation of the scandalous treatment of the mentally ill that had gone on in the past. I mean, if you look back at the 19th century, that harsh punishment, beatings, physical and chemical restraints. We're talking about the age of straitjackets and hydrotherapy and using bromide as a sedative and hydrotherapy, locking people in a cold bath basically until they almost drown to reset the brain, putting them on spinning chairs induced vertigo and nausea, which was also thought to reset the brain. And asylums back then were harsh, overcrowded, underfunded places where they just piled them in and forgot about them more or less. And yes, then in the 20th century, it frankly gets even worse than that. It gets far worse, really. You have the age of the lobotomy, which Joseph Stalin, of all people, referred to as against the principles of humanity. And they would say from Joseph Stalin's part, like, I'm merely putting people in a work camp in Siberia, in work camps in Siberia, mere gulags. Like, that is evil and disgusting. And the shock therapies, the unbridled excessive use of electric shock therapy, which they did to Ernest Hemingway, for example, wiping out his memory and preventing him from writing, to the extent to which he grabbed a shotgun and blew his own brains out, and that was for his depression. And the misdiagnosis rate, and now we have like chemical treatments still, which are forced upon us. I would campaign to end forced treatment of the mentally ill wholesale, to end this pharmaceutical throttle hold we have over our civil liberties, and to prevent the mentally ill from being turned into second-class citizens, and utilise the antipsychotic only in cases of true psychosis, which in my experience, having gone through the mental health system for about 11 years, really are the minority of cases among people who come through these places and are not regular. And that this impression we have of psychosis of epidemic proportions, of psychotic illnesses per year in the population, approaching almost 1% of the population, highly unrealistic. I think this figure actually of 46% potential misdiagnosis of psychosis and psychotic illnesses might actually be a bit low. I think it might be more like 80% even, or 90% from my experience. A lot of people use drugs, experience iffy mental health, and do silly, weird things in the community, get sectioned. A lot of people using alcohol, such as myself, and going a bit spare and ruminating too much on past events and getting too angry and doing sort of stupid things which don't really harm anyone all that much, I have to say, and aren't necessarily, very serious crimes if you look at, if you take everything into consideration. Like, obviously, if you read my medical notes, you think I'm an unhinged, evil human being. They just give you the worst impression they possibly can of you. But like, what they're really trying to do is they're trying to diagnose psychosis as much as possible. Because if they stop diagnosing psychosis, if they stop presenting this picture of an epidemic of psychosis to central government, their funding will pretty quickly dry up, and all the psychiatrists and all the mental health workers will be out of a job. So in this environment, in this culture of the NHS mental health services, we have a culture of gaslighting, of bullying people in the community, of intimidation, of harassment, of using the techniques of neurolinguistic programming to constantly suggest like you might be a bit unwell, you might be like slightly psychotic or on the spectrum of psychosis to some extent. So maybe you need to come into hospital because we need to treat you, I think. I think we're going to try and get you sectioned for whatever bullshit reason we can invent. And keep you going through the system and keep a revolving door going so the hospitals are constantly nice and full, and people say, we need more money all the time from central government. And really they should be closing these places down, and people should be allowed to treat themselves in the community with whatever drug they feel like choosing, be that cannabis or magic mushrooms, which have shown great efficacy in treating PTSD and things such as this, and probably depression, anxiety, symptoms of bipolar, and I know from first-hand experience, obsessive compulsive disorder also, while also increasing our creativity and increasing the number of brain connections that we have, and increasing the neuroplasticity of the brain, and greatly benefiting the cognitive experience. And we should be trusted to medicate ourselves, not coerced into courses of ineffective, dangerous treatments with antipsychotics. I was put on olanzapine in the first instance. They heavily encouraged me to take medication, and I assented to that. I didn't want to take medication particularly. I wanted to take medication that was going to help me. The psychiatrist gave me an antipsychotic when I went with complaints of OCD, which should be a case of malpractice, negligence, etc. But because I'm a mentally ill person, apparently, no lawyer would be willing to take my case, because it would be thrown out of court for mental incompetence, even though the psychosis in my case is ill-founded in evidence. I do not believe anything. I've had psychotic symptoms, I grant you that I've never lacked insight into the voice hearing experiences, for example. So it doesn't meet the diagnostic threshold for true psychosis under the rigorous structure of the DSM-5. Or, for instance, delusions. The beliefs that I hold aren't undermined by incontrovertible evidence to the contrary. And as for formal thought disorder, I've always remained pretty lucid and pretty well able to communicate. Not like being too mute or invoking clanging or word salad or any of these other qualities of true formal thought disorder. And I've gone very loopy from time to time, really from anxiety attacks and things like this in hospital, and they label that psychosis. They can't delineate furthermore between psychosis and mania, which are two rather different things. And a psychotic episode, for it to be diagnosable as psychosis, has to be persisting for longer than 24 hours. And if I've ever believed anything that's been untrue, for longer than 24 hours, I haven't. When presented with evidence to the contrary, I've always changed my opinion. So therefore, they're not fixed beliefs. They're fluid. They are amenable to change in light of conflicting evidence. That's the point. So I've never been psychotic. I've never suffered from true psychosis. I've acted pretty nutty on occasions, when I'm talking to myself and jabbering and yammering, but that's more like mania, not psychosis as such. I've been driven to manic episodes by obsessive compulsive disorder that's unchecked with any kind of therapy or medication. I find cannabis very useful, for example, for controlling my OCD. They say that SSRIs work also. I was on sertraline for a little bit, but I had horrible side effects. I should never have been put on antipsychotics in the first instance. OCD should have been diagnosed straight away. I should have been put on an SSRI, if anything, to control my OCD, but I wasn't. So the shoddy treatment I received at the hands of the NHS There's coercive, shoddy, lax, lazy, uninformed, lacking in rigour. That this is really important stuff to realise. And all they're trying to do, they want to harvest as many people into the mental health system as possible. So we've got mental health problems with epidemic proportions, which is in stark contrast to places like the Netherlands, where the mental health of the population is really a great deal better. That is the truth that the numbers, the statistics bear out. So a country with legal weed and magic mushrooms is doing vastly better on mental health than we are in the United Kingdom. So I would have said that the legalisation of cannabis and psilocybin mushrooms or truffles is a number one priority for sorting out this country's mental health. And I imagine that given the basis and evidence that psilocybin-assisted therapies have currently, that indeed that is likely the best treatment option to be pursuing at the moment for various mental disorders, among which notably is PTSD, depression and anxiety, and probably OCD as well. Even Donald Trump, of all people, has assented to this, yet for some reason, probably because we spearheaded the criminalisation of drug use in the first place in the United Kingdom, despite being among the biggest drug dealers on the planet at the time. We are trying to cripple the German economy, who are our main competition in selling drugs around the world. Because we are heavily involved in the opium and cannabis trades from India and China, and notably selling opium to China after the Opium Wars in the middle of the 19th century, and then that curve. The curve of production peaked in about 1887 or so, and started tailing off as the Chinese domesticated their opium production. And we lost out, the bubble sort of burst on that. Well, it was in 1867 or so, I think, at the peak, or so. Yes, so we were all butthurt about the fact that we lost the most lucrative trade on the planet, and then that we decided we would try and stop Germany from selling morphine, heroin and cocaine to British pharmacies, and then eventually in 1921 we illegalised cannabis as well, because oil giants in the United States wanted to make that illegal because it was threatening the petroleum industry, the oil industry basically, and the steel industry and the textiles industry and the pharmaceutical industry and all that sort of stuff. And since then been a painful, protracted and committed movement towards the legalization of cannabis and other drugs in the United States, which has achieved a degree of success at this point. And the war on drugs should be regarded as an atrocity in history, depriving us of our God-given rights to green plants and the collective inheritance of all humankind, which is the fruits of the earth, the plant and fungal species of planet Earth, which we ought to be using for the variety of proven medicinal benefits that these plants possess, and abnegating our societies of these chemical torture drugs that are foisted upon us by the octopus of the pharmaceutical lobby and the pharmaceuticals industry, which has repeatedly influenced legislation to sequester a group of people within the society, the so-called psychotic mentally ill, and forcibly treat them with dangerous substances which limit cognitive function, inhibit our social lives, cause us to be dull-minded, mute, unmotivated, cause weight gain in a lot of cases, cause heart disease in a lot of cases, cause schizophrenics die younger, a lot younger, than very often than their more healthy counterparts. And I've noticed I've been put on a high dose of aripiprazole recently. My heart rate has gone from the 70s to now in the 90s. And my blood pressure has also increased. I'm going to bring that up at the ward review tomorrow. Hopefully someone from the NHS is watching this video, and if you are watching this video and you agree with antipsychotic treatments in the cases of people like me who does not suffer from palpable or objectively recognisable psychotic symptoms at this moment or at any moment during this admission, then you should be deeply ashamed of yourself for wearing an NHS badge on your uniform. You should be ashamed of taking money from these institutions, and I would recommend that you quit your job and go and do something else if anywhere else will have you. And that is what I would like to say about that. This is a cruel system. This is disgusting. This is against the principles of humanity still. It's not a lobotomy anymore. Like, lobotomies are very rarely administered now. Only in like the most serious cases of mental illness is a lobotomy administered. I think it's got to go through a huge amount of legislative hurdles to make that sort of thing happen. But yeah, electric shock therapy is also fairly crude, extraordinarily misguided, I think. It's just like, it's like someone, a mad scientist, like second guessing how to treat someone. Like all this stuff in psychiatry, psychiatrists have the reputation, I'm sorry to say, as mad doctors, as evil mad doctors, willing to foist upon their patients cruel, arbitrary, degrading treatments, rather than anything like genuine healthcare. If this level of shoddy treatment existed in physical health, they would be killing thousands and thousands of people. That's why they have to become psychiatrists as medical students, because in any other sphere of medicine, they would be killing many people. That is the truth, because through sheer incompetence. Like, the chances of you killing someone, you might drive someone to suicide, really, there's a very high chance of that. And indeed, I know that the likes of Peter Cohen at Green Lane Hospital has indeed driven at least one woman to suicide through his insistence on antipsychotic treatments for her depression, which I'm not sure is a very safe or effective treatment for that even. And he lives with that every day. But, you know, maybe he lacks remorse, so maybe he's fine with it and sleeps like a child at night. So yeah, they can drive people to suicide, but really, like, the risks of them actually killing someone in these places are rather small. However, if they were to be in physical medicine, in a general hospital, their risks of killing someone would be rather large, since they simply don't have the ability, in most cases, to be able to delineate between different classes of mental illness and don't apply nearly enough rigour in the ways in which they diagnose patients. So, for instance, they would misidentify something like ulcerative colitis as bowel cancer, or vice versa, and hence probably lead to the death of the patient unnecessarily. So, when you're in physical medicine, you need to be able to know the difference between bowel cancer and ulcerative colitis, be able to identify them differently, even if they're presenting in similar ways. Otherwise, you run the risk of killing someone. In mental health, there is no such risk. Not really. You know, you can give someone a long course of ineffective treatment. You can torture them in essence, like unwittingly or unwittingly, depending on how much of a dark triad type you are. But like, you're probably not going to kill them. So like, psychiatrists sit around and swagger about on bloated salaries, 80 to 120 grand a year in most cases. Like 80 grand a year for a lower level psychiatrist, like 120 grand a year, 150 grand a year for a consultant. And they work like 35, 40 hours a week, whereas like general hospital doctors on the 70, 80 hour a week, and surgeons like 70, 80 hour a week, more like doing the real work. Or psychiatrists just sit and swagger out the same salary and a very easy life, and that's why people get into it as well. And it's quite competitive to get into psychiatry, because lots of medical students don't actually fancy the real hard, gritty work of medicine in most cases, or in a lot of cases. Thought, I can into psychiatry, that's nice and easy. I'll just do something easy for the rest of my life. And not save lives, but just sort of torment mentally ill people with with horrifying drugs and never, like really help anyone. And we'll just sit around and lazily sort of like accuse them of being delusional for their various idiosyncratic beliefs and whatnot, and just casually section people and just inspect them a little bit and not really pay attention and just say, oh, we're going to section you anyway, and then round and round it goes. This whole brutal system. And the history of psychiatry is one of sheer brutality. And it's calmed down a lot. I have to say, it's a lot better than what it was. It's still not nearly good enough. These places need to actually be helping people. They need to actually be curing people of mental illness. Patients need to actually be getting better. And in 11 years and 13 admissions at this point to mental health hospitals, I've not seen anyone I know meaningfully improve as a result of these treatments. I've met no one really, except actually one girl here whose parents one of her parents is a psychiatrist. And she praises it, but actually she doesn't either. She hates it. It's making her worse as well. She wants to get out, obviously. Everyone wants to get the fuck out of these places. They want to be nowhere near the system. They want the mental health system to have nothing to do with my life. That's what I want. I'm nowhere near it. If I commit a serious crime, send me to a fucking prison. Why don't you? Let me have my fucking day in court. Allow me my right to a fair trial. None of this court of protection nonsense. Let me stand in front of a jury and a judge, an actual jury, and not that show trial I went through in Salisbury at the Magistrates Court for Nikki Lewis's fucking supposed Communications Act violation that she wanted to get convicted of. Out of sheer spite, obviously. And it was a hostile conviction, a miscarriage of justice, obviously, and like total ignorance of context. Just an ignorant, fusty Tory magistrate presiding over that horror of a show trial, and that's a topic for a different video. This treatment is shoddy. Shoddy it is. It is lacking in any kind of rigor, any kind of instrumentality, utility. It improves nothing about. It improved nothing about my life. I know of no one who's benefited from these treatments, and yet they come after you again and again and again. These servile gammon, the likes of this care coordinator at this mental health trust, who's just a lazy fucking thick idiot. Who tried to convince me that changing the motto of the NHS from free at point of need to free at point of delivery wasn't significant, and it means the same thing. He tried to convince me of that. That's how stupid he is. Free at the point of need, free at the point of delivery, as in we'll give it to you whether you need it or not. Think of that. If that doesn't put the fucking fear into you, there's a deep problem with how your brain works. And he's doing this job because his other option is laying brick or managing a McDonald's, basically. That is the truth of these people. Very average. A lot of them rather below average. And nothing really of great value to contribute, but just a drone within the system. A lot of them are like that. And that is all I have to say. It is the average and the below average, looking at the above average, people with a lot more potential than them, and saying actually no, we're better than you because we're sane and you're mental. You're a loony, you are. Actually, I'm just smart, and because you're stupid, you believe I'm crazy. Like Stephen Hawking said, the problem with smart people is they look like crazy people to stupid people. That is my critique of NHS mental health services in 25 minutes or so.